Beloved, today we celebrate the Octave day of Easter, that day on which Jesus appeared again to the apostles in order to draw St. Thomas to faith in his resurrection. Christ, as we know, had first appeared to Mary Magdalene and the women, then to St. Peter, then the disciples on the way to Emmaus, and then to the apostles in the upper room, and all on Easter day. For whatever reason, when Jesus showed himself to the apostles on Easter night, Thomas was gone. And when the apostles testified that they had seen the Lord, he refused to believe them, saying that he needed to personally see and touch Christ if he was to have faith in the resurrection. This incident with St. Thomas, which we hear every year on this Sunday, should cause us to consider our own faith in the resurrection. We are those blessed to not see and yet believe. But in a world which does not believe, and surrounded by those in the church whose belief is questionable, we do well to spend some time thinking about Christian faith, that it is a reasonable and even necessary aspect of human culture. It is a remedy for human pride, and also the basis of our Catholic community. Our faith in the resurrection of the Lord is fundamental to our religion. As St. Paul says very bluntly in 1 Corinthians, "If Christ be not risen again, then is our preaching vain, and your faith is vain." What he means is that all that Jesus did and said received its ultimate verification in his resurrection. And his rising from the dead means that he also demands a response from every human being. Whereas one can overlook all other figures of human history, one must grapple with the person of Jesus Christ and his claims. As Pope Benedict once wrote, "Something new has happened that changes the world and the situation of all mankind." That newness and obligation to respond shows itself especially through the resurrection. For Christ's victory over death manifests that he is not a failed religious leader with interesting ideas, but God himself, who fulfilled his own prophecies about his death and his rising from the dead. From this, we can then consider why faith is necessary to us. Another way to put this would be, why cannot everyone have a vision like St. Thomas when they doubt? First of all, faith is essential to human life. No person can verify all the information that they need to live even day to day. We must trust others and rely upon their knowledge and their skill to live and to live well. St. John references this in the epistle for today when he says, "If we receive the testimony of men, the testimony of God is greater." We regularly receive the testimony of men in all sorts of ways. Not only in eyewitness reports when we were not in that location at the time something happened, but also in everyday fields like cooking or cars or computers. For instance, if I find a recipe online, I must trust that the person who's passed it on has found the recipe reliable. And if I pass it on to someone else after having used it, I give my testimony that the recipe works. That person believes me. And some people are more worthy of faith than others. So, for instance, I trust John's bread recipes more than the prior's. The loftier the knowledge that we have, the more that faith is required. Whereas with a recipe, I know the very first time I try it whether it actually works or not, and whether the person is reliable who gave it to me. In more important matters, I could only learn a truth over a lifetime, and by then my life is over. Matters of virtue, happiness, wisdom, these must be received from others if one is going to be able to put them into effect. And this applies above all in matters of religion, for it concerns God and how to get to God, and these are the most important things in human life. Besides being essential to true human culture, faith is also an antidote to the poison of human pride, and it fosters trust and humility so necessary for salvation. Our first parents sinned against God in trying to obtain knowledge and power rather than trusting him to provide these things for them. Faith was asked of them in the garden to believe that God desired their good and would give them all the good things in due time. They did not believe, however, and so they tried to grasp these things for themselves. And in doing so, they merited expulsion from the garden and a less intimate life with God. We also struggle with this temptation, doubtful at times that God will give us what we want or what we need. In our trials, we often ask why and seek to know the reason for them. To heal this doubting tendency in our nature of distrust, the Lord asks faith of us, to set aside our doubts and to trust his words and his deeds and his witnesses who have come after him. We learn much more about living by surrendering to God than we do by demanding answers from him. This is a paradox of the Catholic faith, but it is proven by the saints. This brings us to a third point, that faith is basis for a Christian community. As Robert Louis Wilkins says, learning to be a Christian requires apprenticeship. It is not a matter of gaining information, but of learning a skill, the skill of loving God and growing in holiness. The task of living our faith is a communal effort, not only of the church militant, but of the church suffering and triumphant also. Because our faith concerns such lofty things and such a demanding way of life, we must trust our predecessors to form us, to teach us how to live out the faith, and we become their apprentices. This plays out in two ways. First of all, we need the saints. Their heroic lives, their gracious suffering for Christ, their encouraging and sometimes blunt words to us teach us how to be Christians. Because of their witness, especially the witness of their holiness and their miracles, we can faithfully follow in the paths that they have trod and put into action their counsels. Second, we also need teachers here on earth. We need men and women of faith and virtue who guide us here and now. It is not enough just to have masters in heaven. There ought also to be masters on earth of the spiritual life, from whom we can learn the skill of loving Christ and bearing our cross. Christian life is in fact hard to imagine, if not impossible, without spiritual directors, without mentors, without mystics and ascetics, without living saints that we actually know. There must be some who live as if the resurrection is indeed a world-changing event, who live the gospel in a radical manner. Pray above all that your clergy be these type of men. That is what the church needs above all in this world. And then pray also for the courage to become such persons yourself. In every age, especially in an age of unbelief, there must be those we can look to as light in the world and salt of the earth. To return then to St. Thomas, notice that he erred in two ways. He withdrew from the community of the apostles and was by himself, and then he was too prideful to believe their witness. Supernatural faith, faith in the revelation of Jesus Christ, actually repairs these breaches between man and God, and also between man and man. We must believe God who is revealed, and this requires trust and surrender. And because our faith is not accumulation of knowledge but a way of life, we must rely upon others to learn how to love God and to remain faithful amid our trials. That is why St. John says that faith is a victory which overcomes the world. It restores to man what he lost by sin and opens the way to eternal life. In this season of Easter, when we celebrate especially the resurrection of Christ from the dead, let us be grateful for our faith, which elevates our minds and unites us to all who love and serve Christ. Blessed are we who have not seen and yet have believed. Let us hold fast to our faith until that day on which we see God face to face and will reign with him forever.